Somewhere in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, an Amish family is about to do something that sounds almost impossible. They are going to sell one farm and use the money to buy several times as much land somewhere else. Not 5 acres, something closer to 5 times the land. Here is how that math works. Prime farmland in Lancaster County has become some of the most expensive in America. There is no single clean number for it, but recent sales and reporting put good ground somewhere around $30,000 an acre and as high as $40,000 to $60,000 for the most sought-after parcels. Now move that same family 600 miles west to rural Kentucky. In the United States Department of Agriculture's latest land survey, farm real estate there, land and buildings together, averages about $5,600 an acre. That is a gap of roughly 5 or 6 to 1. So the equity locked inside one expensive Lancaster farm can buy 4 or 5 times as much ground in a cheaper state. Not 5 turnkey, ready-to-run farms, the way it might sound, but enough land to set up several of the next generation, where a single Lancaster farm could seat only one. And here's the part that surprises people. The same basic economic pull has been repeating for generations, quietly, with no grand plan behind it. When farmland grows scarce and unaffordable in an old Amish stronghold, some families look for cheaper ground elsewhere, and that search is one of the main reasons the Amish keep founding new settlements across the country. Quietly, farm by farm, it is redrawing the map of rural America. Think about what that means. A community whose formal schooling ends after the 8th grade, whose whole culture leans toward land, tangible work, thrift, and careful borrowing, has ended up sitting on some of the most valuable farmland in the country, in a place where their own children can no longer afford to buy in. This is the real economic engine behind one of the biggest quiet migrations in modern America, and this is how it actually works. Start with the wall these families are standing behind. Lancaster is some of the priciest farmland in the United States, and part of what makes it hard to talk about is that there is no single agreed-upon price. County preservation officials, local realtors, and families who have recently sold all describe numbers in the tens of thousands of dollars an acre, and climbing. Put it this way, a good-sized Lancaster farm can be worth $2 or $3 million in land alone before you count the farmhouse, the barn, or a single animal. Farmland here has come to trade less like a place to grow food and more like a scarce asset, and it has been climbing for years. How did the ground get this expensive? Several forces, pulling the same way. The Amish themselves are one of them. They have farmed Lancaster for more than 260 years. They take famously good care of the soil, and their community keeps growing, so demand for every open acre is fierce. On top of that sits heavy development pressure from Lancaster's own growing towns and its place in the busy Mid-Atlantic corridor, a tourism economy worth roughly $2 billion a year, and an aggressive farmland preservation effort that has protected well over 100,000 acres to keep it in agriculture. Donald Craybill, one of the leading scholars of Amish life, once summed up the squeeze in a single phrase: too many babies and too few acres. To give a sense of scale, Lancaster County has now protected well over 120,000 acres of farmland across more than 1,600 farms, among the most of any county in the country. Those easements keep the land in farming permanently, which is exactly what the Amish want, and they are one more reason this is a landscape where developers, preservationists, tourists, and plain families are all competing for the very same ground. Roughly 8 million visitors a year come to see Amish country, and the pressure on every open acre is intense. And once land gets this expensive, the numbers stop working for an actual farmer. A dairy cow does not give more milk because the dirt under her is worth a fortune. Bill O'Brien, a longtime farm lender at the Bank of Bird in Hand in the heart of Amish country, has watched it happen up close. Over his career, he has said, he saw the price of an acre of Lancaster farmland climb from around $8,000 to $20,000, and he put the problem bluntly. The price of farmland here, he said, has moved well beyond the income-producing ability of the land itself. You can still make a living farming it. You just cannot buy in at those prices and expect the cows to pay for the dirt. And this pull is not new. Reports going back decades describe Lancaster families hitting the same wall and finding much cheaper farmland elsewhere. Back in the early 1990s, newspapers were already writing about Amish families selling Lancaster ground and buying land in Kentucky for a small fraction of the price. The exact ratio has always shifted with the county, the year, and the particular property, so no one should treat it as a fixed law of nature. But the basic gap, expensive land at home and cheap land somewhere else, has been wide enough for a very long time to keep pulling families outward. You can see the result in the settlement numbers. The Amish have been founding new communities on cheaper ground for generations, and the pace has picked up sharply. Since the year 2000, according to the Young Center for Anabaptist and Pietist Studies at Elizabethtown College, the North American Amish population has grown 131%, and the number of settlements has grown by a net 373 to nearly 700 today, as families fan out from the crowded old strongholds in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. What was once a slow trickle of pioneers has become a steady, widening outflow. None of this is really new for the Amish. They have been a migrating people since they first arrived in Pennsylvania in the 1700s, spreading into Ohio, Indiana, and beyond whenever land at home grew tight. What has changed is the pace and the reach. A community that numbered a few thousand a century ago now numbers well over 400,000 across North America, spilling into more than 30 states, a scale of expansion that simply was not possible when they were far smaller. So why would a family ever sell? Why walk away from the most valuable ground they have ever owned? For many of them, the arithmetic makes the decision. Amish families are large, often 5, 6, or 7 children, sometimes more, and the whole population doubles roughly every 20 years, because about 85% or more of Amish young people are baptized and stay in the community as adults, though that rate does vary from group to group. So with each generation, there are more children and no more land. Picture a farmer with 5 sons who all want to farm. He has one farm. He cannot split it into 5 working dairies, and in many Lancaster townships, zoning will not even let him carve it into separate house lots for each of them. 4 or 5 grown sons end up staring at a single farm that can support, at most, 1 family. And most Lancaster Amish are not even farming anymore. Only about a third of them still work the land. The rest have moved into construction, woodworking, furniture shops, and small manufacturing, because the farms simply ran out. That shift is visible all over Lancaster now, in the shops, greenhouses, and roadside stands that line the back roads, many of them earning more than the farm ever did. But a workshop still needs a lot to sit on, and a growing family still needs somewhere for the next generation to live. So even the families who have left dairy behind feel the same squeeze, just from a different direction. When one of them finally sells, they are usually converting a very valuable asset, one their own children can no longer afford, into something the next generation can actually build on. It helps to understand why the community keeps growing so relentlessly, because that growth is the real pressure behind everything else. The Amish rarely gain members from the outside. There are only a few dozen adult converts on record. Instead, they hold on to their own. Once Amish parochial schools spread in the second half of the last century, retention climbed and then stayed high. Combine a retention rate in the mid-80s or better with families of 5, 6, or 7, and you get a population that keeps doubling, decade after decade, while the amount of good Lancaster farmland stays exactly the same. So how does a move like this actually happen? Sometimes it is slow and almost accidental. A family hearing about cheap land from a cousin 2 states over, taking the leap, and a few more households following across the years. But some of it has become far more deliberate, and one man shows just how deliberate it can get. Consider Chet Lapp, an Amish realtor who did something his grandfather never would have imagined. He got a real estate license back in 2012. Then he studied an area around Glen Rock in York County, Pennsylvania, walked the land with his broker, checked the prices and the soil, and went looking for Lancaster families who were ready to move there. He argues openly that the Amish should be willing to leave, that getting out from under the tourist crush of Lancaster is one way to protect their way of life. About one young man weighing a farm back home, Lapp put it plainly. He is not going to pay $1 million for it, he said. It is not going to happen. Now, a caution is in order here, because Lapp's Glen Rock project was unusual. Even the reporting at the time noted that it was different from the way most Amish moves happen, and Lapp himself worried that the community had no overall plan. So this is not a franchise that every family runs from the same manual. There is no central Amish strategy office, but it does show how intentional the process can become, and that at least some modern settlements are now being scouted and planned in advance, rather than forming one accidental family at a time. What every successful move does share is community. An Amish settlement cannot stay a one-family outpost for long. It needs enough households to sustain worship, a school, and a shared way of life, so a promising new area tends to draw relatives and other families once the first few arrive. That is how a couple of pioneering households can grow into a full settlement within a few years, and it is why more than half of all Amish settlements today are still small, just a single congregation finding its feet. When a move is deliberate, like Lapp's, a scout will weigh far more than price. A good site needs workable soil and water, roads a horse and buggy can travel, a local government willing to leave a plain community in peace, and ideally, another Amish settlement within a day's ride, so the newcomers are not completely cut off. Word about promising areas travels through a dense web of church newsletters, family letters, and Sunday visits, so that when land opens up somewhere cheap, families several states away can hear about it within weeks. But plenty of moves still happen the old way, quietly, one household at a time, long before anyone would call the result a settlement. Now let us be concrete about the money and honest about it. Say a family sells a Lancaster farm and, after paying off any debt and covering the costs of the sale, walks away with a couple of $1 million in equity. Carry that money to a state like Kentucky or Missouri, where farm real estate averages closer to $5,000 or $6,000 an acre, and it stretches 4 or 5 times as far in raw acreage. But raw acreage is not the whole story, so be careful with the word 5. That money does not turn into 5 turnkey, fully stocked farms. Some of it goes to new barns, to livestock, to equipment, to getting the first crop in the ground, to closing costs and taxes. How far it actually reaches depends entirely on the sale price, the debt, the destination land, the buildings, and the kind of operation the family wants to run. In a favorable case, the price gap can let the proceeds from one Lancaster farm support several adjoining households or businesses instead of just one, seating a father and some of his grown children on working ground in the same community. That is the real power of the gap. It can convert a single stranded asset into room for a whole family to grow, where at home there was only ever room for one. It is also worth saying plainly that these moves are not free of cost or risk. A family leaves behind parents, siblings, and the only church district they have ever known, sometimes for a place where they know almost no one. New settlements can struggle, and a few even fail and dissolve entirely. The land may be cheaper, but the soil, the growing season, and the local markets are all different, and a dairy that worked in Pennsylvania has to be rebuilt from the ground up. The gap in land prices is real and large, but it only buys a family the chance to start over somewhere new. Before we follow that money out onto the map, one quick thing. If you want to catch the next piece of this story, subscribing is how it finds you, because where all of this money is landing is stranger and bigger than one family in Kentucky. That same price gap points at a whole handful of states at once. Take Missouri. Farm real estate there averages a little over $5,000 an acre, a fraction of Lancaster, and rural Missouri offers something Lancaster cannot: room, and in some counties, relatively light land use regulation, so a family can build a house, a barn, a workshop, and a one-room school close together the way their community is meant to be laid out. According to the Young Center, the Amish have founded 21 brand new settlements in Missouri since 2015, more than in any other state, and the state's Amish population jumped about 26% in just 4 years, to more than 18,000 people. Their largest Missouri community, around the town of Seymour in the Ozarks, is now home to more than 4,300 people, and you can watch the money moving in the open-air produce auctions, where whole settlements bring their crops to sell at once. Kentucky tells a similar story. Its 2 largest Amish communities, around Munfordville in the Cave Country and Hopkinsville near the Tennessee line, were both founded back in 1989 and have grown into dozens of congregations since, and there is overflow landing much closer to home too. In northern Maryland, just down the road from Lancaster, a young Amish farmer named Amish Stoltzfus bought 53 acres for around $13,000 an acre. That is still real money, but it is a fraction of what the same family would have paid back in Lancaster, and reporters describe families like his pushing into Carroll, Frederick, and Cecil counties and buying up farms quickly. And up north, in the dairy country of New York, the same gap has been transforming whole regions. New York had about 4,505 Amish in the year 2000. Today, it has more than 25,000, one of the fastest growing Amish populations anywhere, drawn by cheap dairy farms and quiet counties far from any tourist economy. What ties these very different places together is a simple economic fact. Each one, at the moment the Amish began arriving, offered farmland at a steep discount to Lancaster, cheap enough that a lifetime of equity in Pennsylvania dirt could stretch a very long way. Zoom out, and you can see a whole second tier of states filling in behind the old heartlands. Kentucky, Michigan, Missouri, New York, and Wisconsin each now hold somewhere between 10,000 and 22,000 Amish, and a generation ago, several of them barely registered. These are not random destinations. Again and again, they are the places where good farmland was cheap, the regulations were light, and there was room for a growing community to spread out and still stay together. There is one more piece to this story, and it is a fascinating one, as long as we are careful about what it actually is. Lancaster's Plain community helped create a remarkable community bank, the Bank of Bird in Hand, which opened its doors in 2013. That timing matters. It was the first brand new bank chartered anywhere in the United States after the 2010 Dodd-Frank financial reforms, at a moment when almost no one was starting banks at all. And it was built with a mix of Amish and non-Amish local investors to serve borrowers that big national banks find genuinely hard to lend to. The reason is simple. A traditional bank wants to write a mortgage on a house wired for electricity, covered by a standard insurance policy, for a borrower with a long paper credit history. An old order Amish farm often has none of those things. So the Bank of Bird in Hand writes its own kind of loan, including mortgages on plain homes with no grid power and no conventional insurance. It even runs mobile branches, nicknamed Gelt buses, Gelt being the Pennsylvania Dutch word for money, that drive out toward the settlements so customers do not have to travel far to do their banking. It has grown fast. The bank started with about $17 million in capital, and by 2026, it had grown to roughly $1.9 billion in assets, nearly 50 times its size at the start. But it is important to be clear about what this bank is and what it is not. It is a Pennsylvania community bank. Its home lending is limited to Pennsylvania, and there is no evidence that it bankrolls a national migration to Kentucky or Missouri. What it really shows is something quieter and in its own way just as interesting: how fully a plain, cash and handshake community can take part in modern credit when a lender is willing to meet it on its own terms. Relationship lending like that works especially well in a close-knit place, where the banker often knows the customer, the family, the business, and the land personally, which tends to keep losses remarkably low. Just how Amish the bank is depends on how you count. Its own executives have estimated that somewhere between 40% and 70% of its customers are Amish or Old Order Mennonite, with many more connected by family. The rest are ordinary Lancaster and Chester County farmers, businesses, and households. So it is best thought of as a local community bank that happens to have built deep expertise in serving one of the most distinctive customer bases in American finance, and that expertise is a big part of why it has grown the way it has. A shift this size does leave a mark on the places it touches. When Amish families arrive in a rural Kentucky or Missouri county, they often come to buy, they frequently pay cash, and they move quickly, and a handful of families can absorb many of the farms that come up for sale in a small area within a few years. In some of those local markets, that concentrated demand can push farm prices up, and longtime residents notice. In parts of Maryland, local farmers have watched Amish cash offers reset what nearby ground is worth. But this effect is local and uneven. It varies a great deal from county to county, and researchers who study it are careful to say the full picture, including how much Amish buying really drives up rural prices over time, is still being worked out rather than settled. The reception varies just as much as the price effects do. In some destination counties, the Amish are genuinely welcomed. They buy up struggling farms, restore neglected barns, open shops and stands that draw visitors, and pay in cash. In others, longtime residents grumble that a wave of buyers who keep to themselves, drive buggies on the roads, and send their children to their own schools has changed the character of a place. Both reactions are real, and both tend to follow the Amish wherever their numbers grow quickly. And back in Lancaster, the ground a family sells does not get cheaper either. It gets bought by the next Amish family who cannot leave yet, or by a developer, or by a neighbor, and the price holds or climbs. From 2000 to 2024, Lancaster's Amish population grew about 155%, and land values kept rising the whole time. So the family in the middle of all this, selling in one market and buying in a far cheaper one, is capturing a real and lasting difference in the price of land. So where does this go from here? As long as the Amish keep growing, the pressure on land in the old settlements will keep building, and cheaper ground elsewhere will keep drawing families out. Since the year 2000, the Amish have established communities in 6 states that had none before, from Colorado and Wyoming to Vermont and New Mexico. A place like Montana, hardly associated with the Amish, has roughly doubled its communities in about 15 years. Demographers at Ohio State have projected that if current trends hold, the Amish population could approach or pass 1 million people by the middle of this century. But cheap land is not the only thing driving any of this, and that distinction matters because it is easy to make the story sound more like a single strategy than it really is. The Young Center lists several reasons the Amish found new settlements. Affordable farmland is one of them, yes. But so are the pull of specialized non-farm work, the rural isolation that supports their traditional life, a friendly local climate and government, closeness to family and like-minded church groups, and sometimes the simple need to resolve a conflict back home. Continued growth will keep creating pressure for both new settlements and new kinds of work. Cheap land will very likely remain one of the strongest draws. It just is not the only direction these communities can take. In fact, one of the quieter truths of modern Amish life is that the community has already adapted once. Faced with the land squeeze, it built an entire economy of workshops, crews, and small factories that do not need a big farm to survive. Migration to cheap farmland is one answer to the shortage of affordable land. Building that non-farm economy is another, and increasingly the two happen side by side. Which brings us back to our hypothetical Lancaster family, standing on farmland worth millions, deciding whether to sell. If they do, the money will not buy 5 turnkey farms in Kentucky, but it may buy enough land to set up several of their children, where a single Lancaster farm could only ever hold 1. That is the quiet, economic logic underneath one of the biggest migrations in plain America. Not a secret strategy, not a coordinated fund, just a fast-growing people, a wall of expensive land at home, and a country full of cheaper ground still waiting a few states over. The map of rural America is being redrawn, patiently, one family's decision at a time, and the next place it reaches might be a county you have never once thought about, right up until the buggies appear on the road, and the land is suddenly, quietly, spoken for.